Hi, I'm Dr. Bob Winters, sports psychologist here for the World Teaching Headquarters, Leadbetter Golf Academy. And today we're going to be talking about the Golfzon range. And we're going to be asking this question: why is it so hard to learn to play golf? That's the age-old question. And a lot of people say, wow, there's a lot of different answers. But let's first talk about what learning is. Learning is the acquisition of knowledge through basic experience, through teaching, through observation. So learning has been defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior due to experience, subjective interaction, listening to others. The key word though is relatively permanent, because nothing is truly permanent and learning can be changed. But we ask this question: why is it so hard to learn to play golf? Well, there's a myriad of reasons, whether they are physical, technical, psychological, even emotional. And we're going to talk about a few of those today, but I want to give you a little bit of simple scientific background to explain why is it so hard to learn and to maintain good golfing skills. So let's start, and let's go back in time to a German psychologist by the name of Hermann Ebbinghaus, who back in 1880, and his magnum opus, his whole thing was, why do we forget so much? And why is it so hard to remember things? So he actually created something called the forgetting curve. And so he did a lot of tests on himself, did a lot of me-search and in his research, and he was finding out that when we learn something, we actually have those memories, and that forgetting curve, we actually lose a lot of that information within the first hour that we hear something. Think about this for yourself. You go to an auditorium, you hear a speaker. He gives a great presentation. And only an hour or 2 or 3 hours later, you can only remember just a few golden nuggets, from that great speech. And you're sitting there going, wow, I wish I'd recorded that because I lost so much information. The same thing happens in golf. Let's transfer this to a golf lesson. So let's say you're here at this starting point, and this is our XY abscissa right here, and we've got a skill. And in this initial learning, this initial session, you get a lot of information, and you learn that information, and you say, yeah, I'm really trying to retain this information. But here we have, this continuum of time. But as we leave the lesson, and within the next hour, there's an exponential rate of decline, and we lose so much. And within 24 hours, Ebbinghaus was talking that we lose almost 90% of that information. So that's one of the reasons, and the reason why we always say, you use it or you'll lose it. And that's why it's so important, that when we actually, go to learn something, we want to make sure that we can recall and actually, retain some of that information. So this is the forgetting curve. This is why so many times you take a lesson and you're really hopped up and you really feel good about it. But as the next day comes and as the days and weeks go on, you forget what you learned right here in this initial lesson. This isn't, something that's uncommon. It's common for every person that's on the planet. Now, this is one, scientific theory for why it's so hard to learn, because we have this forgetting curve. And it happens not only in golf, but in business, in social situations. It's just, a human nature byproduct. Now, as the years went on, psychologists, motor learning specialists, and sports scientists, started looking at how do we learn? How can we retain and recall information? We had two great sports scientists, motor learning specialists by the name of Fitz and Posner, who back in 1967, created something that we still use today, and that's called the stages of learning model. The stages of learning model suggest that when we learn anything here, novel, new, we are in what we call a cognitive stage. And this model is based on 3 different stages. And as time goes along, we move through these stages at our own rate. And that's why you are the master of your own education, because you're learning at your rate. And one of the things here at Golfzon Range, we realize that every individual is their own case study. We don't really put everybody into a mass and say one size fits all. We want people to understand that when you come here, we're going to treat you as an individual and you're going to go at your own pace based on true science. So the stages of learning, what Fitz and Posner were saying, is that in the beginning, when you learn anything new, it feels different. It feels weird. How many times you actually grip the club in a lesson and you go, that doesn't feel right. That feels funky. All right? That's good because now you've made a change. So in the beginning, in this beginning novel stage, there is a lot of verbal motor. What that means is you're giving yourself a lot of self-instruction. All right, and you know that when you see people who have actually just had a lesson, they're beginning golfers, and they're very deliberate. They're very slow. It looks almost painful because they're going through sort of this bullet list. They're going, down this checklist. Am I doing this right? Checking my hips, checking my aim, checking my alignment. It's the word is very effort, and I'm going to put two words here, effortful. It is full of effort. It is slow, it is deliberate. These people are giving themselves a lot of, verbal instructions. And the other thing is, when we're in this beginning phase, one of the key aspects, the keys to actually really retaining a lot of this information is getting off to a solid start. And that solid start is reinforced by having a lot of correct external feedback coming from the initial session, from the initial instructor. And at Golfzon Range, this is one of the key aspects that we provide to getting our students off to a great start, building a great foundation. And the one thing, as we go from the beginning stage with time, and we practice some of these very basic principles, we now start to go into a different phase. And according to Fitz and Posner, this is the associative phase, or we will call the intermediate phase. And this intermediate phase is a connecting phase. We are starting to connect the dots in the golf swing, the different components. And it's now not so external as we now have a lot of internal feedback, meaning we're starting to get the idea of the movement. And this is really exciting because what happens is that as a student and they're hitting golf balls, and maybe only 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 is a good hit. But as we move on the stages of learning, there now becomes what we call this. And this is a light bulb. It's what I call the aha phenomenon. The aha phenomenon says my external production matched my internal input. All of this verbal cues, this verbalization that I was using, now I've actually got a feel. I can actually transmit that. I now know what all of this different verbalization means. And so now, instead of maybe 1 out of 5 that were correct, we now get to be maybe 2 out of 5, maybe 3 out of 5. And as we keep moving forward, we're now moving into this autonomous phase, which is the expert phase. And the expert phase is, well, this is what we say, we're playing automatic. We don't even really have any, vocal commands or verbal commands. We're now playing with a lot of internal feedback. And what we now have done, we have created this GMP. It is a generalized motor program. We've actually created a blueprint. We know what to do. We've actually laid the tracks, so now the train can just chug on down the tracks. And the wonderful thing about this is we're not thinking about the actual skill itself, but we're now developing strategies. How do I hit this shot? Do I hit a draw? Do I hit a fade? Do I hit a low shot? Do I hit a high shot? So we have moved, from the beginning stage through the intermediate stage to the expert stage. And the one thing I really want to talk about is this. In this stage, we have developed and created trust. Now, all of this stages of learning by Fitz and Posner, talks about one thing. It's about creating confidence, movement confidence. And movement confidence here in the beginning, well, there's nil or none. Because people here mistrust. They don't have any trust. You know, this is very unfamiliar. But as we move through, we develop a lot of trust. Yes, I know I can do this. And remember, trust is akin to movement confidence. And trust in a motor learning context means it's the letting go of conscious, over-controlling manipulation and allowing those processes that have been developed through practice and repetition to come forth. So when we are here, we are in this phase. I know what to do, I know how I'm doing it, and I understand what I'm doing. And that's really what we do here at Golfzon Range. We help players get here from this very beginning stage and actually help them move through practice, through repetition, through external and internal feedback, and also with our simulators with trial and error, implicit memory, implicit learning, where we can get our students here to trust. And that is the name of the game of stages of learning, going from the beginning to the intermediate to the expert phase. But the trick is to get people to be compliant, to keep doing the good things. And our next phase here of our introduction into why is it so hard to learn to play golf, I'm going to talk about several different methods of how people do, try to learn golf and try to do it on their own versus the Golfzon Range way. And we've been answering a couple of these questions. But the basic question is, why is it so hard to learn to play golf? We've actually examined a couple of scientific theories. Hermann Ebbinghaus' the forgetting curve, and also Fitz and Posner's the stages of learning model to sort of describe, why it's so hard to learn something, to remember something, and to actually transfer it into automatic performance. But I'm going to talk, specifically about the learning methods that perhaps you and millions of other golfers fall into these traps of trying to actually learn something and not learning it the correct way and becoming very disappointed and frustrated, and then you just give up the game. So let's talk about, here we have, our XY, axis, and here, on the Y axis, we have the skill level increase, from here low to high. And this is the dimension of time, moving, from start to however far we want to go. And so let's start right here with this person, the self-taught person. Now, we all know how much information there is on the worldwide internet. You can find golf tips galore. But say this person, he goes out and he says, wow, I saw this golden nugget. It's a great video. And they take a couple of those nuggets and they take them to the golf course. And they go out here and they get a little bit better. All right? But the next day they go out and they go play. They can't recall, they can't retrieve that information. Their success was short-lived. It was random. And each day they try something new. Each day it's almost as if they say, I got it, I lost it. I got it, I lost it. There's always this regression curve. They never really have it because they never overlearned it. They never really learned it enough to own it. So really they're like a rabbit in a hamster cage. They're putting forth a lot of energy. And as you see, their skill level, doesn't increase very much at all. They're putting forth a lot of energy, but they're not really going anywhere. And I like to call this the WOOD philosophy. WOOD is an acronym for, it stands for, it works only one day. All right, and that's why people get very, very frustrated. And they go, wow. And they have people come up to them and say, this is the tip you need to hear. Listen to this. I did this yesterday and I played great. And it just over and over and over. It's almost like an emotional roller coaster. I got it, I lost it. And at the end, all they want to do is throw up because they're putting forth a lot of energy. They're getting disappointed, they get frustrated, and then they actually want to leave the game. Then we have, this, type of learning method. A person takes lessons, and in the first lesson, he gets, pretty good. He's got some good good information. He says, I really like, really what I learned. But the problem is they don't follow up with, the instructor. They don't follow up with what they've been taught. They forget so much of the information. And then they might get up here and then they regress a little bit. And then what happens is they go along for a little while and they say, I need to take another lesson. Woo! They take another lesson and they get up here, but then they fall back down. And that's really what happens. They just keep taking lessons and they keep putting forth a lot of money. They get a little bit better, but they never really get to where they need to go. Now, what we're doing here at Golfzon, we're looking at the science. And through years of experimentation and applied study, applied learning, we have found that the blended, the hybrid, method is the best. So what happens here in the Golfzon range is that your instructor gives you some great information, all right? Plus, we're using the simulators to actually give augmented feedback. And as we get here, we realize we're going to have a little bit of that forgetting curve. We're going to have a little bit of regression. But what's going to happen here in different, than all these other, forms, there's going to be retrieval practice. There's going to be spaced repetition. We're going to actually maintain and have compliance where we're going to get better and better and better, because we're going to actually use augmented feedback through the simulators and through a lot of your own training, trial and error, and we're going to blend all of this information together to get you here. And so when we start talking about when a person gets here, from where they started to where they are now, that's really what we call true athletic growth. And the great thing about the blended hybrid method here with Golfzon range is you can do it in a controlled, closed environment. And you don't have to worry about people judging you, comparing yourself to others. You can move at your own pace. And the great thing is, every time that you come back, you come back for training, you're actually not losing all of that information due to the forgetting curve, due to not really remembering that well. You will actually have, these spaced intervals and have spaced repetition. And what we want to make sure of is that we are learning things really well right from the get-go. There was an old instructor by the name of Conrad Railing who I studied, with many, many years ago. And he used to say, golf and the golf swing is like gas for a gas-operated vehicle. If you ain't got gas, you won't last. And he was talking about gas standing for your grip, your aim, your alignment, your setup, your swing, your stance, all of that. That's what we're doing here, and we're reinforcing that along the way. And with the simulated training, with going at your own rate, doing trial and error, you're now getting implicit learning. You're learning because you want to, because you're motivated to go at your own rate. So it's all about mastery. So that's really what we're looking at. We're getting out of all of this frustration. We're getting out of, I'm just taking lessons. I had lessons and lessons. We're not doing any of that. We're actually taking this blended, hybrid, scientific, method and helping you become the most efficient and effective golfer that you've always wanted to be. And always remember, that's what Leadbetter is. We learn better, we practice better, we play better with Leadbetter.